They called it the ship of dream, the unsinkable Titanic. But in just one night, that dream became the world's greatest tragedy. What really happened on that cold April night? Let's uncover the truth behind the legend. In the early years of the 20th century, the great shipping lines were locked in a fierce battle. They fought for control of the profitable North Atlantic route. The Cunard Line had its two magnificent ships, the Lusitania and the Mauretania. They were famous for their incredible speed. The White Star Line needed to answer this challenge. J. Bruce Ismay, the company's chairman, and Lord Pirrie of the Harland and Wolff shipyard, had a bold idea. They would not try to build a faster ship. Instead, they would build the biggest and most luxurious ships the world had ever seen. This was the birth of the Olympic-class liners. Three sister ships were planned: the Olympic, the Titanic, and the Britannic. The plan was ambitious, a true testament to the industrial might of the era. The ships would be symbols of progress and human ingenuity. The Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast, Ireland, was chosen for this monumental task. They had to build a special new gantry, a massive steel structure just to handle the construction of these giants. Thousands of workers would spend years bringing the vision to life. The Titanic was the second of the sisters to be built. Her keel was laid down on March 31st, 1909. For over 2 years, the sounds of hammering and riveting filled the Belfast air as her enormous steel skeleton slowly took shape, plate by plate. The design philosophy behind the Titanic was simple: size and luxury would conquer all. Speed was secondary. White Star Line believed that passengers, especially the wealthy ones, would prefer a smoother, more opulent journey over a slightly faster one. The ship was designed to be a floating hotel, a self-contained world of elegance and comfort that would make the week-long Atlantic crossing feel like a grand vacation. This focus on passenger experience was revolutionary. It promised a new standard in ocean travel, where the journey itself was as important, if not more so, than the destination. The name Titanic was chosen deliberately to convey this sense of immense scale and power. On May 31st, 1911, the massive hull of the Titanic was ready to meet the water for the first time. It was a major event in Belfast. Thousands of people gathered to watch the launch. With the help of 23 tons of soap and tallow to grease the slipway, the giant structure slid gracefully into the River Lagan. It was a shell of a ship with no funnels or interior fittings yet, but its sheer size was awe-inspiring. It took another 10 months of tireless work to complete the ship. Engines were installed, grand staircases were built, and luxurious cabins were furnished. Finally, in early 1912, the RMS Titanic was complete, a marvel of engineering and design, ready to claim its title as the grandest ship in the world. The Titanic was more than just a ship, it was a floating palace designed to astonish. Her interiors were crafted to rival the finest hotels in London or Paris. For the first-class passengers, no expense was spared. They could walk through opulent public rooms decorated in a variety of historical styles. There was a grand reception room, a lounge inspired by the Palace of Versailles, and a smoking room for the gentlemen. The centerpiece was the magnificent grand staircase, which descended through several decks. It was crowned by a beautiful glass dome that allowed natural light to flood the space. This staircase was the heart of the ship's elegance, a place to see and be seen. The accommodations for the wealthy were extraordinary. The most expensive suites on the ship were the parlor suites. These included 2 bedrooms, a private sitting room, and even a private promenade deck. They were lavishly decorated with the finest furniture, carpets, and artwork. Even the standard first-class cabins were far more spacious and comfortable than those on other ships. They had electric heaters, fans, and access to private or shared bathrooms, which was a great luxury at the time. The attention to detail was incredible. Everything was designed to make the passengers feel like they were in a 5-star hotel, not on a vessel crossing the vast, cold Atlantic Ocean. Life in first class was a whirlwind of social activities and fine dining. The main dining saloon was an enormous room that could seat over 500 people at once. It was decorated in the Jacobean style, with intricately carved wooden panels. Passengers also had the option of dining at the more intimate and exclusive à la carte restaurant. The ship offered a wide range of recreational facilities. There was a heated swimming pool, a modern gymnasium with the latest exercise equipment, squash courts, and even a Turkish bath. These amenities were unheard of on an ocean liner. They cemented the Titanic's reputation as the ultimate in luxury travel, a playground for the rich and famous. Even for the second and third class passengers, the Titanic offered a level of comfort that was superior to other ships of the era. Second-class accommodations were comparable to first class on many other liners. They had their own elegant dining room, a library, and a smoking room. For the thousands of immigrants traveling in third class or steerage, the conditions were a significant improvement. Instead of large open dormitories, they had smaller cabins that housed between 2 and 10 people. They had their own dining areas serving simple but plentiful meals. For many of these passengers, the journey on the Titanic was their first experience of such comfort and cleanliness. On the morning of April 10, 1912, the port of Southampton, England, was buzzing with excitement. It was the day of the Titanic's maiden voyage. Crowds gathered at the docks to see the magnificent ship off. Passengers began to arrive, from wealthy industrialists and famous personalities to poor immigrants hoping for a new life in America. The ship's crew, under the command of the experienced Captain Edward J. Smith, made their final preparations. Captain Smith was a respected figure at the White Star Line, and this voyage was meant to be the grand finale to his long and distinguished career. The air was filled with anticipation and a sense of history in the making. The departure was not without a small moment of drama. As the Titanic, with its immense size and powerful propellers, began to move away from the dock, it created a strong suction in the narrow channel. This suction pulled a smaller ship, the SS New York, from its moorings. The smaller vessel drifted dangerously close to the Titanic's massive hull. For a few tense moments, it seemed a collision was inevitable. Quick action by the nearby tugboats, which pushed the New York out of the way, prevented a disaster. The incident was a stark reminder of the immense power of the new liner, a power that was difficult to control. After a brief stop in Cherbourg, France, to pick up more passengers, the Titanic sailed for its final European port of Cool Queenstown, now known as Cove, in Ireland. On April 11th, the ship anchored in the harbour. Small boats, called tenders, ferried more passengers out to the waiting giant. Most of these were third-class passengers, young Irish men and women full of dreams for a future in the United States. It was a poignant scene. As the tenders pulled away, families on the shore waved their final goodbyes. For many, it would be the last time they ever saw their loved ones. Once the last passenger was aboard, the Titanic raised its anchor and headed out into the open Atlantic. The first few days of the voyage were smooth and uneventful. The weather was beautiful and the sea was calm. The powerful engines pushed the ship steadily westward at a speed of around 21 knots. Passengers settled into the shipboard routine. They explored the vast decks, enjoyed the luxurious facilities, and marveled at the sheer size and stability of the vessel. The ship felt so solid and secure that many believed it was truly unsinkable. This feeling of absolute safety was shared by passengers and crew alike. The Titanic was performing perfectly, a testament to the skill of its builders and the promise of a new age of ocean travel. As Friday and Saturday passed, the Titanic became a vibrant, floating community. In first class, the days were a structured series of social rituals. Mornings might be spent walking on the promenade deck, playing shuffleboard, or using the gymnasium. Afternoons were for reading in the library, writing letters on official Titanic stationery, or gathering in the Palm Court for tea and conversation with the ship's orchestra playing in the background. Evenings were the highlight, with passengers dressing in their finest clothes for multi-course dinners in the grand dining saloon. The conversations were about business, politics, and high society. It was a world of immense privilege and comfort. Among the notable first-class passengers was John Jacob Astor IV, one of the richest men in the world, returning from his honeymoon with his young wife, Madeline. There was also the industrialist Benjamin Guggenheim, the Denver millionaire Margaret Molly Brown, and the artist and historian Francis Davis Millet. The ship's managing director, J. Bruce Ismay, was also on board, eager to witness the triumph of his creation. These prominent figures moved through the ship's opulent spaces, their presence adding to the glamour of the maiden voyage. They were the celebrities of their day, and their journey was followed with interest by the public. Life in second class was also very comfortable and enjoyable. Passengers in this class included professionals, academics, and middle-class families. They had their own beautiful dining room, a well-stocked library, and dedicated deck space for recreation. The atmosphere was perhaps a little less formal than in first class, but still refined and pleasant. Lawrence Beasley, a science teacher traveling to America for a holiday, spent his time observing the ship and his fellow passengers. He was deeply impressed by the vessel's stability and the quality of the service. For many in second class, the voyage was a significant and exciting adventure, a taste of luxury they might not often experience. In third class, the atmosphere was different, but no less full of life and hope. The decks in the stern of the ship were often filled with music and dancing as passengers from Ireland, Scandinavia, and Eastern Europe shared their cultures. Large families gathered, children played, and young people talked excitedly about the new lives they planned to build in America. For them, the Titanic was not just a luxurious ship, it was the vessel carrying them towards their dreams. The simple but clean cabins and plentiful food were a welcome comfort. The mood was one of optimism and excitement for the future that lay just across the ocean. Sunday, April 14th, 1912, began as another beautiful day at sea. The sky was clear and the ocean was unusually calm, like a sheet of glass. However, the temperature was dropping rapidly as the Titanic steamed into a region known for icebergs. Throughout the day, the ship's wireless operators, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, received multiple ice warnings from other ships in the area. Some of these messages were passed to the bridge, but not all of them were treated with the urgency they required. One crucial warning from a ship called the Mesaba was not delivered to Captain Smith because the wireless operators were busy sending personal messages for the passengers, a service that earned them extra money. As night fell, the air grew bitterly cold. The sea remained eerily calm, which was actually a bad sign. A calm sea made it much harder to spot icebergs because there would be no waves breaking at their base. In the crow's nest, high above the ship's deck, two lookouts, Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee, strained their eyes in the darkness. They were searching for any sign of danger on the dark horizon. Crucially, the binoculars that were supposed to be in the crow's nest were missing. They had been locked away, and the key had been left behind in Southampton. The lookouts had to rely on their eyesight alone. At 11:40 p.m., Frederick Fleet saw it. A dark shape, darker than the starry sky, was looming directly ahead. It was an iceberg. He immediately rang the warning bell 3 times and telephoned the bridge, shouting the chilling words, "Iceberg, right ahead." On the bridge, First Officer William Murdoch ordered the ship to be turned hard to port and the engines to be put in reverse. It was a desperate attempt to avoid the massive block of ice. The giant ship began to turn, but it was too slow and its turning circle too wide. For what felt like an eternity, the ship and the iceberg moved closer together. The Titanic did not hit the iceberg head-on. Instead, it scraped along the side of the submerged part of the berg. The impact was not a loud crash, but a subtle, grinding shudder that many passengers barely noticed. Some thought the ship had dropped a propeller blade. Others felt nothing at all, but below the waterline, the damage was catastrophic. The iceberg had punched and torn a series of holes along the ship's starboard side, breaching 5 of its 16 watertight compartments. The ship was designed to stay afloat with 4 compartments flooded, but not 5. The unsinkable Titanic was doomed. Water began pouring into the bow of the ship, and its fate was sealed. In the immediate aftermath of the collision, there was confusion, not panic. Many passengers were asleep in their cabins and were woken by the strange grinding noise or the stopping of the engines. In first class, some people came out onto the decks curious about what had happened. They saw crew members preparing the lifeboats and were told it was just a precaution. The ship's orchestra was instructed to play cheerful music on the deck to keep spirits up. The mood was surreal. Wealthy passengers like Benjamin Guggenheim and his valet changed into their finest evening wear, with Guggenheim famously stating, "We've dressed up in our best and are prepared to go down like gentlemen." The order to uncover the lifeboats was given, but the evacuation started slowly and chaotically. There had been no lifeboat drills, and many crew members did not know how to launch them properly. Worse, many passengers did not believe the ship was actually sinking. The Titanic still looked secure, its lights blazing against the night sky. They were reluctant to leave the perceived safety of the huge ship for a small, open boat in the freezing cold. As a result, the first lifeboats were launched half empty. The order was women and children first, but in the early stages many boats left with plenty of empty seats that could have saved more lives. The experiences of passengers varied greatly depending on their class. In first and second class, stewards went from door to door, waking people up and telling them to put on their life jackets and go to the boat deck. Access to the lifeboats was relatively easy from these upper decks. For the third-class passengers located in the lower and more complex parts of the ship, the situation was much more difficult. Many were woken by the sound of water or by fellow passengers. They struggled to find their way through the maze of corridors, only to find gates and barriers blocking their path to the boat deck. While it wasn't a deliberate policy to lock them in, the delayed information and physical barriers meant their chances of survival were significantly lower. As the ship's bow dipped further into the water, the angle of the decks became steeper and the situation grew more desperate. The contrast between heroism and human frailty was stark. J. Bruce Ismay, the White Star Line chairman, helped load some boats before controversially stepping into one of the last ones to leave. In contrast, the ship's designer, Thomas Andrews, was last seen in the first-class smoking room, calmly looking at a painting of the ship's destination, having done everything he could to help passengers evacuate. Captain Smith remained on the bridge, going down with his ship, as was the tradition. These individual stories paint a vivid picture of the human drama that unfolded on the tilting decks. By 2 o'clock in the morning, the situation was dire. All the lifeboats had been launched, leaving over 1,500 people stranded on the rapidly sinking ship. The great vessel's bow was now completely underwater, and the stern was rising high into the air. The angle of the decks became so steep that it was impossible to stand. People clung to railings and any other fixed object they could find. The orchestra, led by Wallace Hartley, had moved to the boat deck and continued to play. Survivors reported that their last tune was the hymn, "Nearer, My God, to Thee." Their music provided a strange, calm counterpoint to the growing chaos and terror, an act of incredible bravery in the face of certain death. As the stern rose higher and higher, the tremendous stress on the ship's hull became too much to bear. Suddenly, with a sound like thunder that was heard for miles, the Titanic broke in two. The section between the third and fourth funnels buckled and split apart. The forward section, now completely filled with water, broke away and began its final journey to the ocean floor. The stern, for a moment, settled back in the water before rising once more, almost vertically. It stood silhouetted against the starry sky for a minute or two, a terrifying and unforgettable sight for those watching from the lifeboats. The final moments were a nightmare of noise and chaos. As the stern plunged beneath the waves at around 20 minutes past 2 on April 15th, everything that was not secured crashed down through the ship. The sound of machinery breaking loose, furniture smashing and crockery shattering created a deafening roar. Hundreds of people were thrown into the freezing water or chose to jump in the final seconds. The water temperature was about -2 degrees Celsius, well below freezing. For the people in the water, survival was measured in minutes. The cold was a more immediate and certain killer than drowning. Once the great ship had vanished, a terrible silence fell, broken only by the cries of the hundreds of people struggling in the icy water. Those in the lifeboats a short distance away could hear the desperate pleas for help. They were faced with a horrible choice: go back and risk being swamped by the desperate swimmers, or stay put and listen to the people die. Most of the boats, under the command of their crew members, chose to stay away. Only one lifeboat, commanded by 5th Officer Harold Lowe, returned to search for survivors after gathering other boats together. By the time he got back, it was too late. He managed to pull only 4 people from the water, one of whom died shortly after. While the Titanic was sinking, its wireless operators had been desperately sending out distress signals. The signal was CQD, the standard call for help, followed by the new SOS signal. Several ships heard the calls, but most were too far away to help in time. The closest ship, the Californian, was stopped in the ice field only about 10 miles away. Its wireless operator had gone to bed just before the Titanic hit the iceberg. The crew on the Californian's bridge saw the Titanic's lights and later its distress rockets, but they failed to understand what was happening and did not wake their radio operator. This failure to act would later become a major point of controversy. One ship did respond immediately and with great urgency. It was the Cunard liner RMS Carpathia, captained by Arthur Rostron. The Carpathia was on its way from New York to the Mediterranean. Its wireless operator, Harold Cottam, was about to go to sleep when he decided to listen in one last time. He heard the Titanic's distress call and immediately woke his captain. Captain Rostron did not hesitate. He ordered his ship to turn around and race towards the Titanic's last known position, 58 miles away. He pushed the Carpathia to its absolute maximum speed, dodging icebergs along the way. It was a dangerous but heroic dash through the same ice field that had sunk the Titanic. The Carpathia arrived at the scene around 4 o'clock in the morning, nearly 2 hours after the Titanic had disappeared. The sight was grim. The first thing that they saw was a single green light from one of the lifeboats. As the sun began to rise, the full, terrible picture was revealed. The vast ocean was empty except for scattered pieces of wreckage and about 20 lifeboats drifting among the icebergs. There was no sign of the magnificent ship, only its tragic remains. The crew of the Carpathia began the slow and difficult process of rescuing the survivors. They lowered rope ladders and slings to help the cold and exhausted people climb aboard. Over the next 4 hours, the Carpathia picked up all 705 survivors from the lifeboats. The crew and passengers of the Carpathia did everything they could to help. They provided blankets, warm drinks, and medical care. The survivors were in a state of shock. Some were silent with grief, while others told harrowing stories of what they had endured. The contrast between the living and the dead was heartbreaking. There were women who were now widows and children who were now orphans. After the last lifeboat was brought aboard, Captain Rostron held a short service on deck for those who were lost. Then, with its sad cargo of survivors, the Carpathia turned back and set a course for New York. When the Carpathia arrived in New York on April 18th, it was met by huge crowds and a frenzy of newspaper reporters. The world had been waiting for 3 days for reliable news. The initial reports had been confused, with some newspapers even wrongly reporting that the Titanic was safe and being towed to port. The reality of the disaster, with its staggering loss of life, sent a shockwave across the globe. Public inquiries were immediately launched in both the United States and Great Britain. These investigations sought to understand what had gone wrong and who was to blame. They questioned survivors, crew members, and officials from the White Star Line. The inquiries revealed a chain of failures. The ship was going too fast in an area known for ice. Not enough attention was paid to the multiple ice warnings. The lookouts did not have binoculars. The number of lifeboats was legally sufficient according to the outdated regulations of the time, but it was nowhere near enough to save everyone on board. The lifeboat drills were inadequate. The actions of the nearby ship, the Californian, were heavily criticized. The disaster exposed the arrogance and complacency that had grown during an era of rapid technological advancement. People had put too much faith in technology and had forgotten the power of nature. In the wake of the tragedy, major changes were made to maritime safety laws. The rules were rewritten to require that all ships carry enough lifeboats for every single person on board. It also became mandatory for ships to conduct lifeboat drills so that passengers and crew would know what to do in an emergency. A 24-hour radio watch became a legal requirement on all passenger ships, ensuring that distress calls would never again go unheard. Finally, the International Ice Patrol was established in 1914. Its purpose was to monitor the location of icebergs in the North Atlantic and warn shipping, a service that continues to this day. Decades passed, and the Titanic rested undisturbed in the darkness of the deep ocean. Its story, however, never faded. It became a legend, a compelling tale of human drama, heroism, and hubris. In 1985, a team led by Dr. Robert Ballard discovered the wreck of the Titanic lying in 2 pieces on the ocean floor. The images of the ghostly ship, covered in rust and decay, captivated the world once more. Today, the Titanic remains a powerful symbol. It reminds us of the fragility of life, the dangers of overconfidence, and the social inequalities of the past. It is a story that continues to fascinate and move people, an unsinkable legend that will echo through history.